day and good afternoon from the Philippines. So I would like to virtually welcome you all to this Center for Neighborhood Studies or CeNS Philippines panel session titled Harnessing Neighborhood Studies for Sustainable Communities. So this session aims to bring the discourse down to the neighborhood level, recognizing the critical role of neighborhoods and their invaluable contribution to climate adaptation, of course, mitigation, response, and sustainable growth of communities. First of all, I would like to introduce our list of panel speakers because we don't have the luxury of the time. We are given only 1 hour, and there are two parts for this session. Our first speaker is Dr. Yaping Wang. He is the principal investigator or our program leader of the Center for Sustainable, Healthy and Learning Cities and Neighborhoods. And he is also a professor at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. The second speaker is Dr. Shilpi Roy. She is the international co-investigator and in-country lead investigator of SHLC, or the Sustainable, Healthy and Learning Cities and Neighborhoods, Bangladesh. And she is also an associate professor of Khulna University in Bangladesh. Our third speaker is Dr. Francis Leviera. He is also the international co-investigator and in-country lead investigator of SHLC Tanzania. And he is the research scientist of Ifakara Health Institute of Tanzania. So we have a common denominator that we are part of that Center for Sustainable Living, Healthy and Learning Cities and Neighborhood. So participants check, we have around 71, although we have 165 registered in our Zoom. And of course, thanks all for coming. Now it's 3:03 and PM Manila time. So because we don't have that time, without further delay, we would like to give the first virtual floor to our speaker, Dr. Yaping Wang. Dr. Yaping, please.
Hello, everyone, and many thanks for Mario to organize this quite important and interesting conference, and also invite me to speaker, and also to quite nice to see my SHFC colleagues speaking at this event as well. And I will give an overall, I probably will not do an introduction because Mario already said who I am. And I will give an overall introduction of the center's work and what the importance of a neighborhood that we think it should be given in studying sustainable cities. And let me just share the slide. Yes. Yeah. And I think we heard quite a lot about general discussions about sustainable development, about developing country cities, and also about rural to urban migration. And there's a lot of discussion about sustainable policies and climate action policies. But we feel there's too much general discussions. But if we look at each city, and we find the cities are quite complex systems, socially, economically, and spatially. There are quite important divisions in every city, and we can find rich areas, poor areas, and areas in between. So to have effective policies for sustainable urban development and for climate actions, we feel the policy needed to be much more specific and clearly targeted to different neighborhoods to let the policy to be effective. So our project actually, you probably already heard it, covers 7 countries in Asia and Africa, including Philippines. And we are studying 14 cities. Each country have a large city and also a small cities. And we have 9 partner institutions and with 50 researchers working on this project in the last 4 years. This could be the largest research project on Asian and Africa cities at the moment. And the project is still ongoing. It's not the final stage yet, and more findings will emerge. And this is based on what we already find. And we see rural migrants arriving in cities in thousands, and cities grew by many millions in over the 10-year period. But migrants come to cities, most of them join into different neighborhoods. Some can afford to have a good life, but most goes to the quite poor areas. As the map shows, in Delhi, over the 30-year period, the land use increased by 6%, and the population increased by about 4 million. So, as I mentioned, migrants arrive in the city. Few of them can afford to live in properly designed, planned neighborhood, and most of them end up in either slums or other informal, unregulated settlements, most of them on slopes or difficult environmental situations. And also in Asia and Africa, slum is quite a big issue in almost every city. And the slum population and areas decline. But in most of the country, you can see from the red column data from 2018, it's still quite large proportion of people are classified as slum dwellers. And the last year, the COVID-19 pandemic probably makes the situation even worse. And we probably, the decline of slum settlement is slowed down. And if we look at the neighborhood level and the life quality in different neighborhoods, it's very different. And for instance, this one shows the water supplies in Dhaka city, a huge city, but the left-hand map shows the proper tapped water dominated supply neighborhood and areas actually is quite limited. Most of the other areas either have a mixtured water supply or a hand pump water supply. If you look at the sewage sanitation systems, you have quite strong correlation with that. And also, if we look at education and health, both are quite important topics we are studying. There are important variations between neighborhoods. And in the rich areas, you could have international schools, and children can have the education, the quality is matched to the United States schools. But in most other areas, particularly poor areas, the education health services is quite basic. Some areas, people can't afford to have more than half-day work, schoolwork. So what I'm trying to emphasize is the neighborhood is quite important. It's quite different in cities. In Cape Town, for example, and the blue areas are the rich, white dominated areas, and the purple and the orange areas are mainly the Black and ethnic minority poor township areas. So this is a quite extreme division, but actually every city we are studying, this rich and poor division is real, and you can observe that everywhere. So based on that understanding, we feel the neighborhood should be a quite important unit of study, policy action in every city. When we talk about sustainable development, for example, if we talk about environmental sustainability, the rich neighborhood, if we look at the inside the neighborhood, for the people themselves, they have a good environment. Economically, they have good economic situations for families, for the neighborhood, and also they have some kind of social networks as well. So if you look outside the rich neighborhood in environmental terms, they consume more energy, more land, more resources, and they have a larger carbon footprint. So their impact on the general environment is quite important, quite big. But if you look at the impact of the environment on the individual families in the rich neighborhood, the impact normally is much smaller than the people who live in the poor areas. So based on this analysis, we feel urban inequalities in spatial scale, inequalities between across the neighborhood, it's a quite important policy area to be addressed, to develop effective policies for sustainable development. For the rich area, the overconsumption of land and resources, and for poor areas, the lower quality, poor standard of living, this kind of problem needed to be solved to make the urban area more sustainable and to have more effective climate action policies. I think I was only given 10 minutes. I guess probably is about to write. And many thanks. You will hear more details from my colleagues, Francis and Shilpi. And so I will stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Yaping Wang, for your very informative and interesting presentation. So Dr. Yaping highlighted the importance of neighborhood, the sustainable urban development, the urban neighborhood problems, especially inequalities and its implications to human mobility and climate action. And of course, our project, or the project on sustainable, healthy and learning cities and neighborhoods, what is it's all about, and the status updates. So the project is still ongoing until next year, and we hope that this will be finished despite this pandemic. So now we could go to our second guest resource speaker, which I have introduced earlier. So Dr. Shilpi Roy, the virtual floor is yours, please.
Hello, a very good morning to all of you. Professor Mario, he has already introduced me. Today, I am going to highlight the area of education in relation to climate migrants. Since I am working in Bangladesh, and there are two case study cities in Bangladesh. One is the capital city, Dhaka, and another one is the third largest city, Khulna. Over the last 3.5 years, HSLC team here in Bangladesh have been working on these two cities. So I'll try to share some of our research findings, basically using the findings from these two cities. So today my focus will be education of the climate migrants in Bangladeshi cities, and we'll try to highlight that neighborhood opportunities really matter in order to ensure their access to quality education facilities in cities. Probably many of you who are here, you have heard the name of Bangladesh due to climatic reasons, because Bangladesh is the most climate vulnerable country in the world. And by 2050, it is going to be the most vulnerable country in the world in terms of climate change. Every year, we get flooding and cyclone almost throughout the country. I have included 2 maps here. The left one is on flood-prone regions. You can see only the white areas. These are actually safe areas in terms of flooding. The rest of the country, in some ways and in various intensity, are actually flood-prone areas. And my city, Khulna, is somewhere here. It is also one of the most climate vulnerable cities in the world. And on the map on the right side, you can see these total coastal regions are highly prone to cyclone. And it actually, cyclone here every year takes many lives due to climatic reasons. So every year, thousands of people leave the rural areas. And most of these areas are mainly rural areas. The white areas are basically the hill regions, and the cyclone-prone areas are, since the coastal areas, there are cities, but cities are less affected in compared to villages due to infrastructural support. So every year, thousands of people who are climate migrants, they move to the cities. I have presented 2 maps here. One is on the capital city, Dhaka, and let me just minimize my windows. So every year, people mainly go to the capital city of Dhaka because it's the capital. There are high concentration of infrastructures, employment opportunities, and urban facilities. And Khulna is the regional city of the southeast region of Bangladesh. So about 44% households in Khulna, they are in some way, they are the migrants. They're immigrants in this city. And they came here over the last 30 years. So you can see the changes of urban built-up areas over the last 30 years. So these migrant peoples, they have a high impact on the city's growth. But when people, especially the climate migrants, leave their villages, they actually come here with almost with empty hands because they lose their savings, they lose their lands, and they had to actually leave everything in the rural areas. And when they come to the cities, they can't afford the high expenses, living expenses in the city. So they end up staying in already existing slums and squatters. And if they fail to do that, they construct new slum settlements. So here is one photographs from Khulna. This is a slum located in the city's corner. And if we find that the urban poverty has significantly reduced due to a high rate of urbanization and industrialization, but it's still the number of urban poor are very high. And most of these urban poor are actually climate migrants. In Dhaka, there are about 1.6 million people living in more than 3,000 slum clusters, whereas in Khulna, nearly 28% people, they live below poverty line, and this figure is 34% in Dhaka. So this is a big number in terms of their population and the scale. And these people, they end up living in slums. So there are different types of threats actually wait there. One is the frequent firing due to various political regions. Sometimes it's a common phenomenon in Bangladesh to displace these poor people. Usually we see fire hazards in the slums, and also since they leave the villages and the city has different employment structure, they need different types of skills. So learning is very important for their adaptation and response to the critical situations. But in reality, migrant children, they struggle to get access to the quality education facilities, and often they are denied quality education. Because from the data, we found that school attendance rates are only 65% at primary level and only 18% at secondary level in some areas. And also another fearing figure is, although they attend primary schools, 65% is a low figure, but who actually go to primary school, they can't continue because the dropout rate in primary education stood at 21% in 2013. Probably this rate is still the same in all the major cities. But the fair is, there is a close relationship between quality education and creating sustainable cities and communities. At the same time, sustainable cities and communities can actually ensure quality education. So both these SDG targets are under threat since there is a limited actually focus on these neglected climate migrant children. Their learning, inclusion, and skills demands are actually remain highly unmet. We found that there are three most common issues these neighborhoods and the children in these neighborhoods or the climate migrant children they face. One is in their neighborhood, there are inadequate classrooms, there are shortages of teachers, there are limited funds for infrastructures and maintenance. So what are the key regions? Those are actually limiting their access to quality education. The key reason is poverty. Definitely, it's the topmost reason that is poverty. Cameron conducted a research in 2020, and he found about 20% slum children in Dhaka, they actually can't access education due to their engagement in work. A significant share of children, they had to actually work due to poverty. So they can't actually attend the usual schools because most of the schools are operated during the daytime. Who are willing to attend schools, they can't actually get access. And another reason is their engagement in employment. The second barrier is due to there are limited education facilities within and around slums in compared to the other neighborhoods. For example, wealthy neighborhoods has world-class education opportunities. We are not talking about world-class opportunities for the poor children, but at least they deserve a basic access to education facilities. Government has rules that every single neighborhood should have one primary school. That is fine, but that is not enough in terms of the demand. We found only one primary schools, government schools within most of the slums, but that is not enough because in terms of the size of this population size of these slums and the size of the children, school-going children, these are inadequate. So what is happening here? NGOs, they are operating schools. You can see the two photographs are NGO operated school. You can clearly understand what sort of infrastructure they have. Although NGO is trying to offer educational opportunities, but the demand is so high in terms of the supply. So they also can't afford offering quality education. And another type of education facilities are intruding in these areas, that is the private tutors. Parents, they want that their children should at least have basic knowledge of numeracy and writing skills. So they hire children, possibly a group of families, they hire one teacher, and that teacher actually teach during they teach at nights, but cost of affording these teachers are much higher than the cost associated to access education in government schools. Why actually this is happening? Because public sector is investing very low in these neighborhoods. They are actually treating these neighborhoods as like other neighborhoods. And sometimes government investments actually has less focus on these areas because city corporations, they don't get any taxes from these areas. So they are deprived of different sort of life opportunities. And children in this neighborhood, since their parents are poor, although there are facilities in other areas, but they can't afford to travel to go there. And there are class issues. possibly people in those neighborhoods and children, those classes, they won't accept these poor children. So there are some barriers to go there. But if we want to achieve the SDG 4, if we want to ensure quality and inclusive education opportunities and to build sustainable cities and communities, there are some areas we must have to focus. We need to address place-based disadvantages. Those are the fundamental, fundamental proposal for creating sustainable cities and neighborhoods. So we have identified three possible intervention areas. One is application of neighborhood-specific education policies, and Yaping has already mentioned about that. And that should aim to shape inclusive, fair, and equitable education opportunities with consideration of the socioeconomic, demographical, economic, geographical, and situational characteristics of the neighborhoods. Because a few minutes back, I have mentioned that these children can't go to school during the day. They have poverty. They need to earn money. So if the family poverty is not addressed, they can't attend the schools. So proposal policies should actually consider these aspects. Also, there is a need of increased public spending, effective coordination of different organizations and level of educations. And there is a need of decentralization of responsibilities. Also, there is a need of proper spatial distribution of education institutions, because we have identified that across the city, the density is not an important key consideration when the education opportunities are proposed. The people in low-income neighborhoods probably they live in very small areas, but the number of children are quite high in this area. So all the opportunities should be driven by the demand. So that's all from me. I would love to hear back from you. You can keep in touch with us. Here is the website link. This is the link of our center located at University of Glasgow. We have Twitter account, we have Facebook platform, we have Instagram account. Also, there are some shares in YouTube, and you can also write me at this address. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shilpi Roy. As written in the chat, again, this presentation is another informative and remarkable talk. Just like the Philippines, Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries in terms of climate change, disasters such as typhoons and floodings, both for both countries affect people, especially the marginalized poor urban communities. So also Shilpi further highlighted that education or learning is important for adaptation and response. So we go quickly to our last but not the least guest resource speaker, which I have already introduced. Dr. Francis Leviera from Ifakara Health Institute in Tanzania. Francis, the virtual floor is yours, please.
Thank you. So I'll present on behalf of my colleagues in Tanzania. You already introduced me, Francis Leviera from Ifakara Health Institute. So I'll be presenting on survey findings of our study, and it is titled From Small City to National Capital. So this is the analysis of housing, education, employment, and health capacities in Dodoma, Tanzania. So briefly, I can quickly give you a brief about Dodoma, which is a small city in the middle of Tanzania. So after independence, Tanzania decided to shift the capital of the nation from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma, but unfortunately, that did not materialize until recently. It was actually 2016 when the government decided to shift the capital from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma. So from my presentation, on my left is the big city of Dar es Salaam, and on my right side it's a new capital, which is Dodoma. So what I'm going to present, I have chosen to present on housing, education, and employment because these are very important determinants of health for Tanzania, and I believe for many other countries. So following the shift of the national capital from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma, Dodoma city has experienced a huge number of migration. So many people decided to move there in search of economic opportunities, businesses, but also public servants. Many of them were shifted from the capital to Dar es Salaam. So I'm going to talk about the migrants, and in some cases I'll compare with Dar es Salaam, but also with the internal migrants and those who were residents in the Dodoma city. So this is the content of my presentation. So Tanzania is also experiencing climate crisis, as in many other countries. So when it comes to shift of the national capital from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma, that one also trigger migration, because in many rural areas, many people are depending on agriculture, and I mean, increase in temperature and rainfall have disrupted many major economic activities in the rural, which is agriculture, through reduction in crop production, water catchment areas, but also there has been a lot of land leaching because of increased rainfall. So many people are nowadays not able to produce enough for their livelihood in rural areas. So many of them are deciding to move to urban areas. So when the capital city decision was made, that one also triggered a lot of migration from rural to urban. So if you look at several data sources, for example, if you look at the presentation here, the slide, it shows the increase in the number of drought frequencies in one of the high producing area in Tanzania. So this is in Morogoro, Tanzania. This is one of the major agricultural land, and as time goes, if you look from 2000 to 2014, the number of drought frequencies has increased. So if you look at 2000 and 2004, the number were ranging, the frequencies of drought were ranging from maximum 2. But if you look at the 2010, 2014, the number of drought frequencies has increased. So the median is around 5 compared to 2 in 2000. So all these are triggering people to move from rural to urban. And nowadays is Dodoma, because that is where the capital is. So we have conducted a large survey as part of the project, Sustainable Health and Learning Cities. And one of the component of the project was a huge neighborhood survey that focused on all types of neighborhood, from the poorest to the richest one. So I decided to stratify the migrant into 3 or 4 major groups, I can say. So those who migrated to Dodoma after the capital move, those who migrated before, like 5 years ago, residents, and those who are internally migrating in the city. So quick findings, reason for migration, as I said, the biggest one is seeking for job, work and business opportunities. And among the recent migrants, that is the main reason compared to the older migrants 5 years ago. If you move to the next one is housing. So we have collected a huge number of data that shows the housing quality, and I've decided to choose the one which is health related, and this is a percent of household that are sharing toilets. So if you look at the recent migrant within 5 years ago, it's close to more than a quarter, around a quarter of households are sharing toilets. And if you look at the older migrants, those who migrated 5 years ago, it's around 20%, I can say, on average. And there is no much differences between Dodoma and Dar es Salaam. So I'm just trying to focus on those who migrated recent and in the past. So as we all know, sharing toilet is linked to disease transmissions such as urinary tract infection, diarrhea, and cholera. So among recent migrants, a little bit more, but even among those who never moved and those who are internally migrating, housing quality remains a challenge. So you can imagine even those who are hosting the migrant already are experiencing huge challenge as well. So the other indicator I've looked is the education of migrants. So if you look, what I have observed is that recent migrants who migrated within 5 years, they are more educated. So for example, if you look at the recent migrant, 27% had university education compared, for example, to the older migrants where only 20% had university education. So if you look at those with the secondary education in the past, it used to constitute 28% of migrants, and now that one has moved to closer to 40%. So new migrants in Dodoma are slightly more educated, maybe because it's a capital, it's more of government jobs and things like that. So the other indicator is work status. Unemployment remains a challenge. So I analyzed the work status in the past 7 days prior to survey, and the graphs shows the number of those who did not work in the past 7 days. So among recent migrant, established migrant and residents, the numbers are high, especially among females. So if you look at females who did not work in the last 7 days, among recent migrants, it's 48%. Established migrants over 5 years, it's 40%. So it's a challenge compared to males, where it's around 22% constitute those who did not work in the past 7 days. So the other one is healthcare affordability. The graph presents the percent of those who could not afford to pay when they were sick. And this percent, although they seem small, but it's a huge number, because if you are not able to afford, which means you are at risk of fatal event. So healthcare financing also, more than half cannot afford, cannot really pay for healthcare because they don't own any insurances. And lastly, to close my presentation, we see that business opportunity remains the dominant reason for new migrants, and many of them are not able to afford quality housing. And in terms of city development, there is still huge room, but many people cannot afford because of their economics. This project is that the project has successfully built capacity of local researcher through different collaborations. So what I have presented is just like a drop in the ocean. So now we have an opportunity to further analyze our existing data. So that's end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis, Dr. Francis Ledira from Ifakara Health Institute. We don't have any more time. I think 5 to 7 minutes for Q&A, but Francis focused on the health issues and more on human mobility. So being at the Ifakara Health Institute. So thank you, Francis. So I don't know if we have some questions, but I have 1 or 2 to 3 questions here for Yaping. Now we go to, without further delay, we go to the Q&A. Dr. Yaping. So a question here is that while we recognize climate change has to be addressed globally, why is it important to consider neighborhoods in climate adaptation and response? Dr. Yaping.
Yeah, many thanks, Mario. That's a quite big question, but I'll give it a try. And I think the cities, as I emphasize, are quite different, particularly in the developing countries. The poor areas is quite large. And the poor areas, the slums, tend to be geographically unfavorable locations along the river banks or coast, or along the railways, lowland, on the deep slopes. So those areas tended to be affected by climate change directly and in environmental terms. In economic terms, the inequalities between neighborhoods is so big, and any change in economic activities will affect people differently. And for example, for the poor areas, if the environmental change have affect the food production, the food price goes up. For the poor, for the rich, they can afford any food price changes, but for the poor, any small changes will have a quite major impact. And I think sometimes we heard in the European context, people was talking, trying to reduce the climate change by eating less meat. The problem is for developing country, for the poor areas, sometimes you feel probably that is not the right policy because people don't eat meat most of the time anyway. So I think in social terms, it's also a problem. The poor tend to be poor in generations. And when they are poor, and if there's a problem in their neighborhood, they tend to have nowhere to go. And most of them are going back to their rural areas, as the pandemic impact shows last year. In China, in India, and when the pandemic emerged, migrant people ran out of the city and tried to go home. One of the reasons is their area they are living is so poor. There's no water to wash hands like many of us do. And when we talk about social distance, there's no spaces for them to have social distances because the spaces are so small. And on the other hand, they don't have steady income. When it is not done, there's no income. No income means no food and no money to pay the rent. So they have to run out of the city. So I think all these quite important differences, inequalities, require quite important policy to address the inequalities at the same time to talk about climate change. At international level, we have a debate about rich country, poor country. I think it is important, but inside the cities in developing countries, the rich and the poor division and the differences must be addressed, must be recognized to have any sustainable or climate action policy to be effective.
Yeah, thank you, Yaping. You hit the question. And this topic is very relevant because in Glasgow, where you are staying and where you're teaching, we have the COP26 in November. 2 weeks, and this will be discussed. This climate justice, especially the poor are more vulnerable due to climate change. So, because we don't have the time, another question for Shilpi. What are the roles of neighborhood studies and the academe in the promotion of resilient and sustainable neighborhoods? Shilpi, if you
Yes.
are ready.
Thank you for the question, Mario. There are three elements linked to your question. First is the resilience and sustainable neighborhood. I'll focus on there because there are policies. We have especially prepared policies for HDG, but in that policies, what we felt through our studies, there is a little conceptualization. Actually, what does it mean by sustainable communities or neighborhoods or principles of creating sustainable neighborhood? That is the resilience. But the policies, I think they haven't thought a lot about that. So researchers, who are working in urban areas, there are less interest in working on neighborhoods level because the policymakers don't want to hear about the spatial scale we are talking about. So researchers and academics, they can actually inform the policymakers in helping building the conceptualization, because this conceptualization will be context specific. Even for different types of neighborhoods, the conceptualization would be different. And since we have diverse contexts, because we have found there are about 11 types of neighborhoods in Dhaka and 9 types of neighborhoods in Khulna. So for all these different types, there is a need of different conceptualization. And until or unless we are focusing on neighborhood level studies, we won't be able to actually find out those things. So conceptualization is one area. Another one is the necessity of data. There is a need of rich database in order to inform the policy making. And until or unless we are doing the neighborhood level studies, we can't produce this data.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Another one is different types of findings on different areas, because there are 17 SDG targets. There are possibly 7 principles of creating sustainable neighborhoods. So in all those areas, researchers can actually prepare the policy proposals based on the findings from neighborhoods. So that's all from me, Mario. Is that enough?
Yeah, thank you. And Shilpi has a project together with, of course, the Philippines, the UNESCO International Institute for Environmental Planning, looking into education and the neighborhoods in cities. Shilpi mentioned in Dhaka and Khulna, and here in the Philippines, the city of Manila. So 1 or 2 minutes for Francis. Maybe 1 for 2 minutes. How can human mobility amidst climate change affected the attainment of SDG 3, or good health and well-being at the neighborhood level? Francis, 1 or 2 minutes, please.
Okay,
because,
yes,
I
thank
have
you.
to give the Attorney Mark Gamboa for the 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think from my presentation, we have already seen this one, that migration, I can say human mobility really has affected people who are living in the urban area significantly. So there are needs for putting special efforts on making sure that people in the urban attain good health. So this may include, for example, as we know, there are increasing challenges in terms of access to healthcare. So there are a lot of overcrowding. People are not able to pay. So this requires special consideration. For example, introduction of universal health care, where people can pull the risk and not leave this risk to individual. But the other one, especially on human mobility, is increased number of people are creating different social problems. People cannot really work together and improve their neighborhood. So there is a strong need for improving neighborhood governance to make sure that we manage people who are migrating to urban, people who don't have time to meet, people who don't have time to cooperate and do something for their neighborhood. So those are the important things I can mention for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So without further delay, thank you. If you have any questions, please put in our virtual bulletin board, or you could go direct to our speakers. So to proceed to the second part of our session, because we have no time left, I would like to introduce our moderator, Attorney Mark Anthony Gamboa. He's Assistant Professor of the University of the Philippines School of Urban Regional Planning and concurrent Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the CeNS Philippines. And he is also the in-country co-investigator of SHLC Philippines. Professor Mark, you have the virtual floor, please.
Thank you, Dean Mario. The second part of this parallel session on harnessing neighborhood studies for sustainable communities is called the Neighborhood Interactive Session. It's a showcase of a visual and spoken narrative of neighborhoods, or kapitbahayan, or the Filipino term for neighborhood. As we at the Center for Neighborhood Studies recognize neighborhood and civic science as essential component of understanding urban development and climate change, this Neighborhood Interactive Session provides a virtual resident-led tour of neighborhoods, locating our kapitbahayan partners at the forefront of neighborhood science. Our neighborhood for the virtual tour today is Jaime Cardinal Sin Village, a residential area located in Punta, Santa Ana, Manila. The original settlers of the neighborhood were relocatees from the hazard-prone banks of the Pasig River, while others came from several other places. Named after the Jaime Cardinal Sin, the one who initiated the construction of the housing buildings, the emergence of the neighborhood could be considered unique, since it represents the convergence of efforts of at least 3 organizations: the Serviam Foundation, a civil society organization of the Catholic Church; the Pasig River Rehabilitation Commission, a government agency that administered the housing project for some of the present residents who were previously affected by the clearing of the 10-meter easement of the river; and the neighborhood organization established and organized by the residents themselves. I would like to introduce Reverend Father Norman Jesus Apon, or as we fondly call him, Father Japs, who has been an active collaborative creator of the SHLC project in the Philippines and of course of CeNS. He is a board member of the Serviam Foundation and the administrator of the Jaime Cardinal Sin Village Urban Housing Project. Father Japs, the virtual floor is yours.
Hello, good day. Hello, everybody.
Good day, Father Japs.
Welcome to the Jaime Cardinal Sin Village virtual tour. Okay. Our village is 2-hectare land. This photo defines the heart or the center of the Jaime Cardinal Sin Village. Without our church, the village is nothing. The village will be able to sustain itself since the church is present, and the church will serve as a guide for the residents. The teachings of the church would guide the residents what would be the best to do for the village. Our residents believe that God is with us and guides us in whatever we do. So despite being guided by the Catholic Church, our residents still believe that they must work hard in order to sustain their lives. So they believe they should not wait for help to be given. Instead, they must exert effort. They still need to work to provide their needs and meet their goals in life. Our village has 6 buildings dedicated to the housing. The buildings' names are Building 1, 2, 3, A, B, and C. These are 7-story buildings located near the Jaime Cardinal Sin Learning Center. There are also provisions of linear park in front of these buildings. And as mentioned earlier, below buildings A, B, and C are also some commercial spaces of business of the Jaime Carlsen villages. The school, in front of the housing building, is the Jaime Carlsen Learning Center. We established this school for preschool, grade school, and high school levels. And most rooms are equipped with air conditioning units to provide a better learning experience due to the extreme heat conditions of the country. So even non-residents of the village enroll their children at Jaime Carlsen Learning Center. And you already saw an example of our 7-story house building. So this is an example of our 3-story building. Buildings 1, 2, and 3 are located near the Our Lady of the Perpetual Help Parish and the village entrance and exit. The housing structures in the village were constructed in 2 ways. These buildings 1, 2, and 3 were built through the Serviam Foundation and the residents themselves. The Serviam Foundation is a civil service organization from the Catholic Church. The Pasig River Rehabilitation Commission, the PRRC, a government agency, administered the housing activities for some of the present residents under buildings A, B, and C. The residents of these buildings were affected by the clearing of the 10-meter easement of the Pasig River. We call it the ETA. So we now go to the transportation. So our residents uses 3 modes of transport: the public utility jeepneys or the PUGs, the motorboats, and the tricycles. We also call them the padjak. The Jaime Carlsen village is connected to the J. Posadas extension, where PUJs are available 24/7 going to the Visoria and Quiapo and vice versa. The motorboats provide the residents an access to the Pandacan area since land travel will take longer time and numerous transfer of public vehicles. Tricycles, the padjak, are also stationed outside the village. The tricycles provide accessibility to key areas near the village. Now we proceed to the place of recreation. So this is the covered basketball court located at the eastern side of the village, which is also considered as a place of recreation for our residents. The court has adequate lighting, painted floor, and fiberglass basketball stand. So I consider this as the best basketball court in our area. So large trees were also planted in the middle of the village of the pathway, providing shade for the residents or having their leisure time. So this ends our short virtual tour of the Jaime Carlsen village. So our question and answer will be held anonymously. I will now give the floor back to Attorney Mark Gamboa for the continuation of the session. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you very much, Father Jobs, for the virtual traffic congestion-free tour of Jaime Carlsen Village. If you would want to still check the 360-degree photos, we will provide the link to the 360-degree photos. And if you would want to ask questions, as mentioned by Father Jobs, our Q&A portion for the Neighborhood Interactive session would be held asynchronously. The link to that question and answer part of the Neighborhood Interactive session is flashed on your screens, and you are also provided a link through the chat box. And that you can post your questions on our virtual bulletin board under the thread Day 1 Urban Governance and Planning, and click on the name of our session, Harnessing Neighborhood Studies for Sustainable Communities. As we end this session, we would like to highlight the idea that technical knowledge is not the only knowledge of worth. Neighborhood science coupled with climate science could provide us with a holistic understanding of the urban development issues, climate change challenges, and migration. With that, we end the session, the parallel session on harnessing neighborhood studies for sustainable communities. We thank all our resource persons and our participants for actively participating in our parallel session. You can also continue to raise questions and comments through the virtual bulletin board. Thank you very much and magandang hapon.